Alright, morning everyone. Today we won't do a technical presentation, but rather we hope that we will help you understand how game engines can be used for much more than games. That's the goal today, and hopefully you can integrate them into your research and creative toolbox. That's what we hope. So I'm Gabriel, and I'm basically a programmer who tinkers with audio. And I'm here with Michael, who's a director, film director, and many other things. He will tell you himself. The main point, the main rationale behind all that, the main motivation, is that it's really simple, it's really trivial. What we do is hard. And it's hard not for audio-related reasons, that's one of the big issues, but it's hard for software reasons, because we all deal with all kinds of software issues. So I've listed a few, I think you can all relate to all that. And beside that, you can notice that when we do programming audio, when we do audio computing, it's done within a larger framework, larger scenario. So usually an interactive thing, and the biggest interactive frameworks there are today are game engines. So it looks like a good idea to just have a look at what they are. Let's do that. Here is a bunch of numbers. It doesn't mean much. The point is just that they've had the exact same software issues, but they've accumulated experience of thousands of people for decades, in the case of Unreal Engine, and they find ways to solve the exact same issues that we're having when we do the programming. So they became good at solving the exact same issues that we're having when we do the programming. So it looks like it would make sense to, well, not consider them as an end, so not consider game engines as something you integrate your prototypes into once you're done, but just to bring them earlier in the chain, the prototyping and creative part. So consider them as a toolbox. You can just leverage during your process. And well, the end goal is just being able to do more audio and less software-ish things. That would be the goal. So let's do that. Let's try it. Game engine as a toolbox. So it's just a set of tools and features that you can leverage. We'll show you 3 of them, just 3 features that just come for free with all game engines, whatever they are, and that I think are the most immediately valuable to you. First thing is interfacing with the rest of the world. So it means you can pretty much ship on anything. So almost any device, almost any software platform, mobile, VR headsets. You can use any input controller, keyboard, mouse, gaming stuff, joysticks, you name it. And with the rise of VR these last years, there's been interesting development for us, because things that used to be less standard are now more out of the box. So media OSC support in most engines, spatial audio, but I think there's a talk about it today. And something that's interesting that's been hinted at by Ethan earlier is using game engines as a service. So they all have asset libraries where you can publish your work to, but you can also pick various snippets. So that's an interesting thing that's also often overlooked. You can think of it as music DSP basically, but on a much larger scale. So that's the first thing. The second thing that usually lacks the most in most of the prototypes we do is a nice UI, a nice edition UI. And all of these engines are no longer for programmers only. You don't necessarily have to write code, but you have nice UIs, auto-generated ones, and they all have some kind of visual scripting language. All of these engines. This is Unreal and Godot, and they all have some sort of edition that's targeting to anyone. The last thing is way more specific. It's a timeline. So you can see it as a DAW, a typical one, but that one is dedicated to games, and because games are non-linear, they're dedicated to non-linear playback. They can handle that, they can manage that. It's a tremendous help for any thing that you can do. So there's the bell now, and it's all a bit theoretical, so I'm handing it over to Michael.
Okay, so I'm always Michael. I have something like 5 minutes to tell you about ideas that we have at Determinism, using game engine and using audio to be a good studio creating animation series, because Determinism has been founded by Grip Animation, which is basically my production company that I started with Thibaut something like 1 year ago, and we founded Determinism with Gabriel Animation, which is a very famous 2D animation studio in France, believe me. And basically Determinism is focused on creating animation with video game engine, which is a big adventure today. It's not something that you see on each corner of any street. And to understand what we are doing, I have to tell you more about our pipeline. We used, the goal of our pipeline is to be a service company, and we decided to creating everything from A to Z in the company, from the script to the deliver to the broadcaster. We use basically 2 softwares. We use Blender to create animation, modeling stuff, and characters and animation, and we use Unity to receive and play animation, to do the lighting, the grading of the imaging, and to output the images to deliver to the client. On this basic pipeline, we work on several bricks based on audio. And I'm just going to give you a little example of what we are doing with these little bricks. First bricks is basically to use the sound to create animation. I have a little example here where we used a recording audio of a voice to animate the mouth of the character.
Titi, ta, 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 titi, bah ça alors quand même, c'est quand même un sacré truc. Ah oui.
Okay, little example. Next one is the fact that what we have seen is just audio leads the animation. And here, on this example, I'm going to show you the way that we use the sequence and the timeline in Unity to deal with something like linear and interactive thing, something between a game and a film. So we had the chance to work with Unity last year. We made a little film for them. A film that maybe if you have time to shoot this thing, you can grab on your phone and get it back to home. This film is basically a little some kind of template to help people to jump into how to create a film with Unity. And so in this little movie, we played. It was a movie, but we released a specific version which was interactive, which was not publicly shown, but we have the ability in this interactive version to change the way that the story is going to end or to happen. And just here, we have a little interactive thing where you can play with the character. And you can see here how the timeline can tell the time to go forward and to jump backward, to play sounds and to be very interactive in the way that the player is going to live the adventure. Another example here that we have finished is at the end you can change the color of the characters, and you can stay in this infinite loop forever. The time that you choose the color of the character on the figure, and then you can go back to the start of the story and start the story again with a new skin. So it's how behind the scene everything was done and was created on this short. And that's all I think. Yes. 4 minutes, something like that.
Great. That's impressive. So it works because Michael is doing it on a daily basis, but there's a catch. things can go wrong, so just so you know before you got there. First thing is latency. It's not great. It's not perfect, let's say. You can use it for most of the uses, but I wouldn't recommend it for live usage, like serious live usage. That's one of the things that's lacking at the moment. So for audio, it's kind of a shame, but it's not there yet. It might happen in the next years. Determinism is an issue we run into because game engines are complex, and so it's hard to make such a complex thing deterministic. So two executive runs won't necessarily be exactly the same. There are ways to work around that. You can bake your data, basically, and this is where the timeline got in handy. So you can manage to do with that. And the last thing is that Unreal and Unity, especially Unreal, are massive beasts. So they just can't fit on a single board computers, all this kind of stuff. But you can still use game engines, typically Godot. It's less known, it's a free and open source, one of those that has the most traction. And it just works. It works on the Raspberry. So you can use it for various other usage, so give it a try. One of the things that evolved in the past years is the fact that you don't have to be a programmer. I've said it already, you just don't have to. And you can come from different backgrounds to get into game engines, and so you just make different entry points to using those tools. So say you just have audio, as we've seen in the Michel demo. You just have some audio assets and you want to rearrange them, experiment with non-linear interaction or stuff like that. You can use a timeline. It's called differently in Unity and Unreal, but same concept. Or if you use to patching, so you've used pure data and max a lot, you can do that. We've seen that with MetaSound, MetaSynth. There's something that's a bit bleeding edge in Unity, but it's there, it exists. So you can do that. And up to that point, you haven't written a single line of code. And if you're a programmer, you can still be one. And you can still reuse your existing code as long as it's got a C area. And because Unreal and Godot are coded in C++ anyway, and there's a pipeline to integrate your own modules. And Unity has a dedicated SDK as well. So it's quite doable, so do it now. It's free to try, depending on your usage, but sometimes non-games usage is still free to use, actually. So it's easier to just jump into it. There's a large community, large documentation. They all have common concepts, which is nice, because it means once you've learned, say, Unreal, you've picked one at random, you don't have to forget everything you've learned. You can just reuse and recycle your concepts. It's just about vocabulary, basically, and there are pages dedicated to translating terms from one engine to the other. So you can do that, and if you've got a big code base, you can integrate it quite easily in all engines. So just do that, and do that now. Thank you.